Hello and welcome to the CX Files for December 1st, 2022. My name's Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Hey Mark, I'm Peter Ryan. I am based in Montreal, and it is great to be with you today for what I think is going to be a very provocative interview around really some cutting edge delivery locations that are coming to the forefront.
Well, I know that you talked with Martin Roe, and I think that he's based in Dubai, isn't he?
Martin is, as we know, the CEO of CCI Global. Now, CCI Global has done a tremendous job in terms of leveraging both South Africa and Mauritius as delivery points for contact center services. Now, what I think is really exciting about what they're doing now is they're opening up Central Africa, and they've been truly one of the pioneering companies in this regard. There's been a great success story that they've had thus far in Kenya, supporting some amazing brands and consumers in different parts of the world from that emerging Central African country. Equally speaking, we talked about some of the other geographies within emerging Africa and the potential that they have. But realistically, Mark, this part of Africa is on the tips of the tongues of many different BPOs right now. I can speak to an example with Rwanda. Several of our analyst colleagues were down in Rwanda a few months ago and came back thoroughly impressed by what they saw from the perspective of not just a country that's on the move, but certainly a BPO and a CX industry that is on the move as well.
Yeah, well, I've seen certainly in the IT industry, there's at least half a dozen countries in Africa that you would now consider to be world leading and highly innovative. So it's no surprise that we're starting to see CX attention now as well, especially because so much CX also now relies on technology.
Very much so, very much so. And the more that new locations in Africa are able to put themselves forward as logical destinations for delivery of frontline CX or the development of CX tools, this is going to be better for the industry. It'll give the outsourcers more options from which to choose where they set up shop. It'll also give the clients a lot more in terms of where they can consider setting up their own operations with an outsourcing partner. And something that we touched on over the course of the interview when I was talking to Martin a little bit about his experience thus far is the enthusiasm of different governments in these series of Central African countries in terms of welcoming the customer experience management industry as an employer of choice, as an opportunity to draw more investment into these locations.
Okay, so why don't we go straight to the interview with Martin Roe and talk about Africa and some of the new CX destinations.
You know, the CX Files is lucky to have a network of colleagues and friends from around the world that are always very much on the cutting edge element of what's happening in regards to different models for customer experience delivery. And today, we're very fortunate to be joined by one of those individuals in our network. It's Martin Roe, who is the CEO of CCI Global. Martin joins us from his offices in Dubai. And Martin, it's great to see you again.
Thanks. Good to see you, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
Well, the pleasure is all ours, and we're really excited to talk to you today about a subject that you and CCI have been very much at the forefront of, and that is the emergence of what I would call, for lack of a better term, emerging Africa. Now, Martin, you and I go back a long ways in the realm of offshore delivery, and you, like me, I'm sure, can recall the days where Africa more or less meant, from a BPO perspective, you had South Africa on the southern tip, you had Egypt on the northern tip, and a little bit of French going on in Tunisia and Morocco on the western northern side of the continent. But being practical about it, this has changed tremendously over the course of the past couple of years. Now we're seeing different destinations like Kenya, like Ghana, like Rwanda, like Senegal, just as a few examples popping up, and not just popping up for the sake of being mentioned in a press release or in an impact sourcing website, but for real concrete CX delivery going on. Maybe as a kickoff, you could talk a little bit about CCI's journey in emerging Africa. We'd love to hear about where you are right now, what you're doing, and really what's prompted, in your view, amongst the client base and the outsourcing community, the interest in some of these new exciting African BPO delivery destinations.
Okay, sure. So CCI, we're ostensibly an African business. We've been operating in South Africa since about 2005. And we've been the pioneers, I guess, in African outsourcing, first of all in South Africa, and to your point, more recently, across a number of African countries. We are a unashamedly CX provider. We're not a systems integrator or any of those things. We manage customers on behalf of our partners, and they're typically in the UK, in Australia, or in the US. In fact, mostly now in the US. We think, and our investment thesis is fundamentally based on a few things. So firstly, we think that the market more broadly is changing, and i.e. the market for BPO or CXO services is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And it's changing rapidly as the traditional reasons for outsourcing and offshoring, high volume, low value transactional activities to offshore destinations because of labor arbitrage and cost. We think that's over. We think that's over because of automation, robotics. We think it's over because of self-service. Organizations are just better at what they do. And the consequence of that is the things that are left are more complicated and or more emotional. And we think that people in Africa are better at handling complicated and emotional than people in traditional offshore markets. I think that's number one, and that seems to be rapid. I think the second reason that the last few years has seen a very substantial uptick in interest in African outsourcing is historical over-indexation in traditional markets. So people had too many eggs in the Philippines or in other markets, and COVID highlighted how big a risk that actually is. So people saying, okay, I need, in the CCI case, I'm looking for a scalable global English destination that can deliver these complex and emotional services, but at a cost that's affordable. And I think that's been even further exacerbated by the hiring crisis in the UK and in the US and so on, where it's impossible even to reshore those activities because you can't hire people who've got the capability to deliver those complex and or emotional services. I think the third reason there's been a big uptick in the last couple of years is that there are case studies now. So South Africa's been delivering services for a long time. There's lots and lots of positive case studies. We've even got positive case studies in other markets. We've got 3,000 people in Nairobi, in Kenya. Nearly all of them are servicing US logos, and they're servicing them to an extremely high standard. So there's organizations deciding to look and go to Africa are not the first. Yeah, there's case studies. So I think there's those three reasons have seen that a massive acceleration in demand for Africa.
And it's interesting that you mention the extent to which you've got American end users that are being serviced from Kenya, which is a very good news story. You know, I can recall back about 15, 20 years ago, Kenya was seen as the next big thing. There were a couple of local providers that had strong US backing. And while they got a little bit of traction at first, things seemed to disappear. But I think what it highlighted to me was that there was a significant amount of value in a country like Kenya that even, you know, the impetus of getting a contact center up and running and off the ground, and what CCI has been able to do in terms of the follow through and getting what is not a small number of end users by any stretch, and certainly not a small number of employees working out of Kenya, I think really validates the fact that you can move beyond South Africa, you can move beyond Egypt. And this has got to be music to the ears of, as you mentioned, enterprises that are really facing a crux in terms of whether it's onshore labor, nearshore, or many of the traditional offshore sites.
Correct. And I think that one of the challenges is in Africa as an operator is that most things are greenfield. So you're starting from scratch. So I think that one of the reasons that things have taken time to get to where they are today is, I was in Kenya last week, where we're building a building in Kenya because we don't think there are sufficient numbers of high quality buildings that suit our needs. And we've done that in South Africa, and that takes a bit of time. But it also takes an entrepreneurial spirit. So I think that the fact that we're a privately owned business, we can make a decision to make a big investment. We're not managing the business quarter to quarter like some of our public competitors, has allowed us to kind of blaze a trail into these markets. And what we're now seeing is other organizations, many of whom are a lot bigger than us, entering the market after we've sort of blazed a trail. And we're happy about that because it builds a critical mass so that our potential partners, potential customers, they want to see an ecosystem develop in a country. And it's there in South Africa, and it's getting there in other markets. And when we look at where we're going next and next and so on, our experience in the last couple of years in East Africa is given us a spring in our step to replicate what we've already done there.
So let's think about this from the perspective of a visiting prospect or of an existing client that's interested in traveling into Kenya or perhaps one of the new emerging destinations. I'm always of the view that one of the biggest inhibitors for a lot of different locations has been the Google effect, as it's being called, where somebody hears about a destination that they might be intrigued by or they might be planning to travel to. They Google it and they see some bad news. I can tell you there's a couple of countries in Central America that have fallen victim to that quite frequently over the course of the past few years. Putting the Google factor aside, Martin, when somebody's coming to visit a site in Nairobi, what should they expect in terms of the welcome they're going to get, in terms of the atmosphere that they're going to find on the ground as a traveling business visitor? And what are they going to find in terms of a CX culture that's established there?
I think the first thing that they're going to find is that they're going to be pleasantly surprised, because the Google effect in most countries in Africa is not great, and therefore expectations when people arrive or even do virtual tours with us are massively exceeded, because Kenya, for example, is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It's a buzz, exciting place. There's construction and skyscrapers being built everywhere, and that's fantastic from an infrastructure perspective, which is really important to particularly American buyers. Then the next layer, and arguably the most important layer, is the quality of the people. So the quality of the people in Kenya is just exceptional. It's clearly they speak English, and they speak English with a quasi-English accent or a British accent. They're highly educated. Of our 3,000 people, more than 90% of them have a university degree, and an accredited university degree from a decent university, accredited internationally. Very, very large numbers of graduates that we've managed to hire. Very, very savvy and sassy young people, very technically in tune. There's, as you well know, there's a high degree of technical take-up in Africa because they've leapfrogged many of developed economies. It's extremely stable. There was an election in Kenya recently. It was a free and fair election, and ironically and interestingly and somewhat controversially, when I was there just the day after the election and talking to some of our team, did you vote for the guy that won? They said, no, we didn't vote for the guy that won, but that's democracy, we accept it. There's five more years of stability and economic growth. So it's very stable, it's very modern, it's very sexy and sassy, and it's very culturally compatible with the markets that we're servicing, in particular the US. I think that the level of understanding of North American culture, not just in Kenya, but in most of the countries that we're operating from, is arguably as good as an American. These people get it, they understand it, and they can talk to American consumers and drive important metrics like Net Promoter Score and sales conversion, and things that are really important to our customers. So when people come, they see that, they meet those people, they talk to our existing customers, where we're typically the best performer. So our Kenyan business, typically when competing with other destinations, including onshore, is typically number one, including beating our operation in South Africa. Add all those things together, and it's a no-brainer to choose.
And you touched on something there that I think is crucial, and that is the ability to show empathy and to understand the consumer in the key sourcing markets, whether it's North America, the UK, Australia. One of the big things that I believe a lot of the nearshore providers in the Americas have focused on, and with good reason too, is the extent to which an agent in Mexico or Jamaica or Honduras or Colombia will really get the consumer in the United States or Canada. And we're seeing now more and more of that, especially in spots like Jamaica that are focused on the UK. So to me, it's very important that you've got a Kenyan labor force where young people, especially, as you say, have that savvy and that sass, and they're able to banter back and forth with an American who might be on the telephone with them, not just about the product or service they're supporting, but also what might be happening in popular culture or in business, or dare I even say politics. Sorry, I said the P word there. But you know where I'm coming from. This is, I think, an impression a lot of people might initially have, that a country like Kenya wouldn't have that alignment, but clearly does.
It not only does, and it never ceases to surprise me to the extent that it does. And there's a commonality in most of the countries that we're operating from. And it surprises me even that countries like, we've got an operation in Ethiopia, in your mind's eye, and the Google impact of Ethiopia is probably negative, and it's about famine, or it might be about war. Whereas our view is that Ethiopia has the potential and capability to be a massive outsourcing and offshoring destination. There's 110 million people. They speak English with a beautiful accent. They're very, very highly educated, 250,000 university graduates a year. Most of those graduates are in the STEM subjects. So they're highly technical, but also high degrees of empathy. And we find that in all of the countries that we're either operating in today or planning to operate from in the near future. And I think for I'm a Brit, it surprises me still. For an American, even more surprising. But it's borne out in the data. So, and again, the performance is everything. So we're talking about, driving better CSAT and Net Promoter Score. We're talking about driving basket size in a retail context. We're talking about retaining customers. We're talking about handling complicated insurance claims. So things that really matter to our clients and their businesses are just handled better in Africa than can be handled, even, dare I say it, onshore. Yeah, so we are outperforming onshore in nearly every program where we compete with onshore. And that's really, really important in all of our sites.
Someone mentioned to me the other day that one of the reasons we've seen locations like India or South Africa really take the outsourcing opportunity by the hand and run with it is because of the fact there's been such support from different levels of government. And I would tend to agree with that. If you don't have a playing field that is going to be facilitated to support an industry and to really help an industry get up and moving, it's not going to work. How's the response from governments at all levels in places like Kenya been to the contact center and the outsourcing space?
It's been very good. One of the criteria that we need to understand before we enter a country is the at least the willingness and flexibility of a government that would allow us to run our business, i.e., not overbearing levels of paperwork and red tape and so on. So it's been very, very good. It is, it's easy, relatively easy to do business in Kenya. If I step back and look at the continent as a whole and the different countries that we're operating in, it's mixed. Some are better than others. The one thing that characterizes all of them is a recognition that there is no other industry in the world that can create this many jobs so quickly for young people. Africa's a crazy young continent. The average age of sub-Saharan Africans is less than 20. and it's 40 in the US. So it's a very, very young continent, and those young people need jobs. And investing in, I don't know, manufacturing plants and so on might create hundreds of jobs in 5 years' time. We create hundreds of jobs in a month in our industry. So everybody's, from a government perspective, is really, really interested in that from an economic perspective. Some governments are absolutely outstanding, and I would call out the Rwandan government. Outstanding. I would argue better than any government in Europe in terms of their focus and how joined up they are in trying to attract. It's a very small country, but they punch above their weight in terms of the level of focus of their government. So the Rwandans are phenomenal. And as you point out, the South Africans have been focused on this sector for 10 or 15 years, and it's beginning to pay dividends for them now because of the number of people that are employed. I think what we're going to see from a government perspective rapidly is many other countries trying to catch up and maybe eat the lunch of some of the other countries in Africa. Zimbabwe, perhaps. We're looking at Zimbabwe. We're doing things, as you know, in Ghana, Ethiopia, which is something of a kind of moonshot. As I say, I think it could be something very material. Again, the Ethiopian government have been very, very. The Ethiopian economy is only just opening up, but the pace at which they're embracing outsourcing is exciting for us.
You know, Martin, something that you touched on a little while ago really hit home with me, and that's the pleasant surprised nature that people have when they get on the ground in some of these countries. I'll just give you an example. A few years ago, I was invited to come to visit some BPO providers in Senegal. Now, Senegal, as you're aware, obviously is a great location for French language support. I had no preconceived notions of the country, but I couldn't get over the fact when I landed in Dakar, how modern the city was. The infrastructure was pretty well brand new. Very, very nice hotels, the same standard that we'd find in Canada or the US. And I'm really excited for the fact that we have got these options that are coming onto the table for executives in all sourcing markets, whether it's in Western Europe, North America, ANZ. It's going to, I think, really provide a lot of good choices, and quite frankly, also help accelerate this employment that's going on in countries, as you mentioned, a case in point, Ethiopia, that really can use this assistance, that can use this good news, and really be brought into that level of development that will really have a strong multiplier effect in not too distant a future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, that there's a bit of a buzz around the principles and concepts of impact sourcing. All outsourcing in Africa is impact sourcing. You know, there are levels of unemployment and underemployment in Africa that are just, you know, staggering and unbelievable by Western standards. And you know, that what we're able to do and what we've been able to do from having an impact on local communities goes beyond the creation of an entry-level job. It's developing people's careers and giving them skills that are transferable, actually, you know, in the new world of remote work and so on. So I think that, you know, that it's almost the story's too good to be true in Africa, but it is. Yeah? So that's kind of, you know, when we're hosting prospective customers particularly from North America, they find it difficult to believe until we get them there. And when they get there, they you know, we've got a 100% hit rate of when people come to Africa and they see it with their own eyes.
Martin, it has been a pleasure chatting with you and hearing about the CCI Global journey in Africa. It's very much a good news story, and one that we will be eagerly anticipating more news from around 2023. So all the best to you, and thanks for taking the time to chat with the CX Files today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Peter. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.
So
That's
just
okay. I got stuck on mute, but I'll delete that bit.
okay, cool. I'll start back in.